This line is not for Coach." The words sliced through the air, sharp and dismissive, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Have you ever felt judged the second you walk into a room? Judged by your clothes, your accent, the color of your skin? For one gate agent at JFK, making snap judgments wasn't just a habit. It was a power trip that got her through long days. But on this crisp autumn morning, she picked the wrong passenger to bully. She looked at a poised, elegantly dressed black woman holding a first-class ticket and saw only one thing: someone who didn't belong. With a sneer, she uttered those 4 words that would detonate her career and send shockwaves through an entire industry. What she couldn't possibly know was that the woman she was barring from the plane didn't just have a ticket. She owned the entire fleet. This isn't just a story of karma. It's a story of what happens when quiet power is finally forced to speak. The air in John F. Kennedy International's airport's Terminal 4 hummed with its familiar organized chaos. It was the sound of 1,000 hurried goodbyes, the rhythmic clatter of rolling suitcases over polished floors, and the distant, reassuring roar of jet engines spooling up for journeys to distant corners of the world. For most, it was a place of transition, a functional purgatory between origin and destination. A place where humanity was processed efficiently, where identification was checked, belongings scanned, and bodies sorted into their appropriate categories: first class, business premium, economy, basic economy. A hierarchy as old as commercial flight itself. The autumn sun streamed through the vast windows, casting long shadows across the terminal floor. It was 11:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Terminal 4's Concourse B was at its mid-morning peak. Gate agents called final boarding announcements. Late travelers rushed with panicked expressions, and frequent flyers navigated the space with practiced indifference. At Gate B24, Meridian Airways flight MA-1107 to Geneva was preparing for its 12:15 p.m. departure. The gate area was organized into neat lanes with retractable barriers, a physical manifestation of the invisible lines that separated those who waited in priority, boarding from those who stood in the general queue. Within the next 30 minutes, everything would change. Not just for the 2 women whose paths were about to collide at this gate, but for an entire industry that had operated with unchecked biases for too long. If you've ever been misjudged because of how you look or what you wear, this story might feel familiar. Maybe you've stood in line somewhere, a restaurant, a store, an airport, and felt someone's eyes dismiss you before you even spoke. Drop your own experience in the comments below. And if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of appearance, hit that subscribe button right now. This story needs to be shared. Now let's meet the woman who was about to teach an airline a lesson in judgment, and the woman who made the mistake of underestimating her. Alexandria Wilson sat in the Meridian Airways Celestial Lounge, a space designed for the airline's most valued customers. Yet Alexandria looked intentionally unremarkable. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored charcoal gray pantsuit, a silk shell top in a soft cream color, and practical, elegant loafers. Her hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and the only jewelry she wore was a classic timepiece on her wrist, a Patek Philippe watch that was a quiet nod to her appreciation for fine engineering, and a simple gold band on her ring finger. She was reading through aeronautical engineering schematics on her tablet, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. To anyone who bothered to look, she was just another business traveler, perhaps a mid-level executive preparing for a meeting. This anonymity was a luxury she cherished. As the founder and CEO of Skyward Innovations, the world's leading private aerospace leasing and technology firm, her face was well known in boardrooms from Seattle to Singapore. But here, in the everyday chaos of air travel, she could blend in. She could observe. Alexandria was 42 with keen eyes that missed nothing and a quiet confidence that came from building something extraordinary from nothing. She had earned a PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT at 25, worked for NASA for 3 years, then launched Skyward Innovations just before her 30th birthday. Now 12 years later, her company didn't just lease aircraft, it innovated them, retrofitting fleets with proprietary fuel efficiency systems and ultralight composite materials. The very airline she was flying today, Meridian Airways, was one of her biggest clients. Every single wide-body aircraft in their international fleet, all 82 of them, was owned by Skyward Innovations and leased to Meridian under a $3.6 billion contract. Her flight today, MA-107 to Geneva, was on one of her newest assets, an Airbus A350-1000 registration NSWI. She was flying to Switzerland to finalize the acquisition of a smaller avionics company, a move that would solidify Skyward's dominance in the market for another decade. She always made a point to fly on her own assets unannounced to experience the service and the machinery just as any other passenger would. It was her version of a surprise inspection. Alexandria watched a family with young children enter the lounge, the parents looking exhausted before their journey had even begun. A flight attendant immediately approached them with coloring books and apple juice for the children. Good, she thought. The small things matter. She scrolled through her tablet to the efficiency reports on the A350's new wing design. The composite materials her team had developed reduced fuel consumption by an additional 4.2% compared to the standard configuration. It meant less carbon in the atmosphere and higher margins for Meridian. A win-win that had taken her team 3 years to perfect. Her phone vibrated silently. A text from Gabriela Rodriguez, her executive assistant board, approved the Zurich acquisition unanimously. Legal team ready with paperwork in Geneva. Hotel suite confirmed. Dinner reservation at 8 p.m. with Jakob and his team. Alexandria sent a quick thank you in response. Gabriela had been with her for 7 years, brilliant, meticulous, and unfailingly loyal. Together they formed the core of an operation that now employed over 200 people worldwide and influenced aviation standards across the globe. A discreet chime sounded, and a lounge attendant announced that priority boarding for flight MA-107 to Geneva was now beginning at gate B-24. Alexandria closed her tablet, slipped it into her leather tote bag, not a designer brand, but Italian-made and of excellent quality, and made her way from the lounge to the gate. She walked with a quiet, confident stride, the posture of a woman accustomed to commanding respect without ever needing to demand it. As she approached the gate area, she observed the efficiency of the boarding process, the demeanor of the ground staff, the cleanliness of the space, all factors that would find their way into her mental assessment of Meridian's operations. Alexandria noticed a slight delay in the priority boarding process. The gate agents seemed flustered, tapping aggressively at their terminals. A minor computer issue, perhaps. She made a mental note to have her team look into Meridian's gate processing software. Inefficiencies cost money, and both Meridian and Skyward benefited from smooth operations. She took her place in the nearly empty priority lane, her boarding pass pulled up on her phone ready to present. She never used paper boarding passes, a small environmental choice that would add up if adopted widely. Alexandria believed that transformative change often began with the smallest of adjustments, whether in aircraft design or human behavior. As she waited, she imagined the journey of the specific aircraft she was about to board. Manufactured in Toulouse, retrofitted with Skyward's proprietary technology in Seattle, delivered to Meridian just 4 months ago. She knew every curve of its wings, every detail of its engines. It wasn't just a plane to her, it was a magnificent piece of engineering, a testament to human ingenuity, and yes, hers. What Alexandria didn't know yet was that this journey would test more than the aircraft's performance. It would test the very values that Meridian Airways claimed to uphold, and her own resolve to create lasting change in an industry still plagued by outdated attitudes and assumptions. As she approached the boarding gate, Alexandria Wilson was about to encounter a different kind of turbulence, one that no engineering solution could fix. Across the terminal at Gate B24, Rachel Morgan was having a monumentally bad day. It had started with a screaming match with her landlord over a rent increase she couldn't afford, and had curdled further when her supervisor, a weaselly man named Harrington, had publicly praised a junior agent for a suggestion Rachel herself had made a month prior. The morning had continued its downward trajectory with a coffee spill on her uniform, a scheduling mix-up that left the gate understaffed, and now a computer system that seemed determined to crash during the boarding of MA-107, one of Meridian's flagship international routes. Rachel felt trapped. 17 years with the airline, and she was still here at the gate, a glorified bouncer in a polyester uniform dealing with an endless parade of entitled, clueless passengers. Her bitterness had calcified over the years into a rigid, prejudiced worldview. At 51, Rachel Morgan had once dreamed of traveling the world. She'd joined Meridian Airways in her mid-30s after a divorce, attracted by the flight benefits and the promise of adventure. But the adventure never materialized. Instead, she found herself stuck in an endless cycle of early mornings, late nights, holiday shifts, and the constant grinding pressure to process passengers faster, smile wider, say yes to the impossible demands of people who viewed her as little more than an obstacle between them and their destination. She tapped her acrylic nails on the counter, her smile a thin, brittle line. "Good morning." She'd chirp, her voice dripping with false sincerity before finding some minuscule infraction to wield her power over a slightly oversized bag, a wrinkled boarding pass, a question asked at the wrong time. Each was an opportunity to assert her dominance in the tiny kingdom of Gate B24. Rachel sorted people into boxes with a glance. The loud family with too many carry-ons were a nuisance. The young backpackers were cheap and would probably try to sneak extra bags on. The businessmen in flashy suits were arrogant and demanding. And in her particularly sour view, black passengers in the first-class line were always suspect. She'd seen it all, she told herself. Upgrades on points, one-time splurges, credit card frauds. In her mind, they were temporary visitors in a world they didn't truly belong in. It was a vile, baseless prejudice, but it was the cracked lens through which she viewed her world. When Rachel saw a casually dressed white man approach in jeans and a polo, she'd smile and say, "First class today, sir." Wonderful. But when a well-dressed black passenger approached her, smile would tighten and she'd scrutinize their boarding pass with exaggerated care, sometimes asking for additional ID just to be sure. Most passengers didn't complain. Those who did were labeled as difficult in Rachel's mental filing system. Her supervisor, Thomas Wilson, a 47-year-old former flight attendant who'd been grounded after a back injury, rarely questioned her methods. In fact, he often backed her decisions, creating an environment where Rachel's prejudices went unchallenged. This morning, Thomas was helping at the adjacent gate, leaving Rachel to manage MA-107's boarding with just one junior agent, Parker Davis, a college student working part-time who was still learning the ropes. Parker, a 22-year-old white man with an eager-to-please attitude, had quickly learned to mirror Rachel's approach, adopting her biases as a way to gain her approval. "System's running slow today," Rachel muttered to Parker as she rebooted her terminal for the third time. "Keep the first-class line moving. Check IDs carefully. We've had issues with upgrade fraud this week." Parker nodded, absorbing Rachel's instructions without questioning the underlying message. Be suspicious, especially of passengers who don't fit your mental image of first class. Rachel watched as a gray-haired white couple approached, dragging expensive luggage. The woman wore a tennis bracelet that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly salary. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, Geneva today." "Lovely," Rachel cooed, barely glancing at their boarding passes before waving them through with a flourish. Next came a middle-aged white businessman in a rumpled suit, clearly a frequent flyer who treated the boarding process like an inconvenience to be endured. "Morning, Mr. Daniels," Rachel said flatly, recognizing him from previous flights. He grunted in response, thrust his phone toward her to scan, and proceeded without a word. Rachel's smile never reached her eyes as she processed passenger after passenger, her internal categorization system working overtime. With each interaction, she wielded her small power, deciding who deserved courtesy and who deserved scrutiny. "When's your break?" Parker asked during a brief lull in boarding. "Not until after this flight pushes back," Rachel replied, rubbing her lower back. "I've been standing since 5 a.m. "That's rough," Parker sympathized. "At least the first-class boarding is almost done. Just economy left after this." Rachel nodded, surveying the remaining passengers in the priority lane. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted a black woman in a simple pantsuit waiting patiently at the back of the line. Something about the woman's calm demeanor irritated Rachel. Too calm, too confident. Rachel made a snap judgment this passenger would require additional verification. As the pre-boarding announcement for Celestial First Class was made over the speaker system, Rachel straightened her navy blazer and prepared to exercise her authority once more. The computer system finally seemed to be cooperating, and she felt a small surge of control return. Little did she know that her next interaction would dismantle that control entirely and expose biases that had festered unchecked for far too long. Alexandria Wilson stepped forward in the priority boarding lane as the line moved steadily toward the gate. She noticed the agent at the podium, a woman with tired eyes and a name badge that read Rachel. She saw the tightness in Rachel's jaw, the way her gaze flickered over the passengers, sizing them up. Alexandria had seen that look before. It was the look of someone deeply unhappy, someone who mistakes authority for power. She watched as Rachel processed passengers with varying degrees of courtesy, warm smiles for some curt nods for others. Alexandria made mental notes still in her role as an anonymous evaluator of Meridian's service. This inconsistency in customer treatment would definitely appear in her assessment. When her turn came, Alexandria stepped forward, offering a polite small smile. She held out her phone with the digital first-class boarding pass displayed on the screen. Rachel didn't even look at the boarding pass. Her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of Alexandria from her simple suit to her unadorned face, and her lip curled into a barely concealed sneer. "I'm sorry," Rachel said, her voice loud enough for the growing queue of economy passengers to hear. "The economy boarding hasn't started yet. You'll need to step to the side." Alexandria's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of surprise registered in her eyes. She gently pushed her phone another inch closer. "I believe you'll find this is for first class." "Seat 2A, Alexandria said calmly. Rachel let out a short, sharp laugh that was pure condescension. She still hadn't touched the phone or looked at the boarding pass. She gestured with her chin toward the back of the rapidly forming economy line. "Ma'am, I know what a first-class passenger looks like. This line is for priority boarding only. The coach line is back there. You need to wait until your zone is called." The pronouncement hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Coach only. It wasn't just a directive. It was a judgment, a public declaration of where Rachel believed Alexandria belonged. The handful of other passengers in the priority lane, all white, turned to stare. A few in the economy line snickered. Alexandria's calm demeanor remained unbroken, a placid lake over a core of volcanic rock. Behind Alexandria, a Hispanic man in his mid-30s wearing glasses and a well-fitted suit cleared his throat uncomfortably. Michael Reyes, a professor of sociology returning from a conference, had been observing the interaction with growing discomfort. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Rachel. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This woman was in the first-class lounge with me." His voice was polite but firm. Rachel's eyes flicked to Michael, then back to Alexandria. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I know the boarding procedures. If she has a legitimate first-class boarding pass, I need to see it properly." Alexandria met Rachel's hostile gaze with a look of unnerving serenity. "Perhaps, Alexandria," said her voice dropping to a low, clear, and dangerously steady tone, "you should look at the ticket." It was 11:42 a.m., exactly 28 minutes before Rachel would face the consequences of her actions. Rachel's nostrils flared slightly, the only indication that Alexandria's composure was irritating her. With exaggerated reluctance, she finally reached for Alexandria's phone, squinting at the boarding pass as though expecting to find evidence of forgery. "This doesn't look right," Rachel muttered, though the boarding pass was perfectly standard seat. 2A Celestial First Class Priority Boarding Group, 1. "Where did you get this upgrade?" "It's not an upgrade," Alexandria replied evenly. "It's a confirmed first-class reservation." Rachel's expression soured further. "These tickets are very expensive. Are you sure you didn't make a mistake in your booking?" Several feet away, a young Latina woman in her mid-20s had pulled out her phone and was discreetly pointing it toward the interaction. Lucia Mendez, a social media manager for a fashion brand, had recognized the situation unfolding for what it was. Having experienced similar treatment herself, she felt compelled to document what was happening. "I'm quite sure," Alexandria said, maintaining her composure. "I fly this route regularly." Rachel handed the phone back with visible reluctance. "I'll need to see additional identification. Company policy for verification purposes." Alexandria reached into her bag and produced her passport, handling it to Rachel without comment. Her expression remained neutral, but those paying close attention might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. Not anger, but a dawning recognition that this interaction had crossed a line from poor customer service into something much more troubling. Rachel scrutinized the passport photo, comparing it to Alexandria's face with exaggerated care, as though conducting a high-stakes security check rather than a routine boarding verification. "This says Dr. Wilson," Rachel noted with skepticism. "That's correct." "What kind of doctor?" Engineering, Alexandria replied simply. Rachel's eyebrows rose. "Engineering." "That's not a medical doctor." "No, it's a PhD." Alexandria confirmed her patience still intact, despite the increasingly inappropriate line of questioning. Michael Reyes shifted uncomfortably behind them. "Is this really necessary? The flight is boarding." Rachel shot him an irritated look. "Sir, please wait your turn. I'm conducting a verification." Alexandria's phone vibrated with a text. She glanced down to see a message from Gabriella. "Everything set in Geneva. Jacob confirmed dinner." "I assure you," Alexandria said to Rachel, "my documentation is in order. May I board now? I have preparations to review before arrival." Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned to her colleague. "Parker, can you call Thomas over? We have a situation." Parker nodded, picking up a radio. "Thomas to gate B24, please. Verification needed." Alexandria checked her watch, the Patek Philippe that had belonged to her father, a mechanical engineer who had inspired her love of flight. It was now 11:47 a.m. The confrontation had drawn the attention of nearly everyone in the immediate gate area. Lucia Mendez's phone was still recording her expression, a mixture of outrage and determination. "Is there a problem?" Alexandria asked, her voice still measured, though a slight edge had crept in. Rachel didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "We just need to make sure everything is in order. Wouldn't want anyone in the wrong seat." The implication was clear. Rachel still didn't believe Alexandria belonged in first class. As they waited for Thomas to arrive, Alexandria made a subtle movement, reaching for her own phone. She typed a quick message to Gabriella. "Experiencing boarding issue at gate B24. Bias incident in progress. May need to activate protocol insight." The reply came instantly. "Standing by. All systems ready." Protocol insight wasn't just a reaction plan. It was a carefully designed accountability framework that Alexandria had developed after years of similar experiences, a way to document and address discriminatory treatment not through angry confrontation, but through methodical, irrefutable evidence gathering. Thomas Wilson approached the gate, his supervisor badge prominently displayed. At 47, he carried himself with the authority of someone who enjoyed enforcing rules. He gave Alexandria a cursory glance before turning to Rachel. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Rachel lowered her voice, but not enough to prevent Alexandria from hearing. "Verification needed for this passenger. Claims to have a first-class ticket." "Something seems off." Thomas turned to Alexandria, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes already filled with the same prejudice that had colored Rachel's treatment. "Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass and ID, please?" Alexandria handed over her phone and passport again, her dignity intact, but her patience wearing thin. It was 11:52 a.m. The line behind her had grown with Michael Reyes and several other first-class passengers still waiting to board. What happened in the next few minutes would change not just Alexandria's day, but the culture of an entire airline. Thomas Wilson took Alexandria's phone and passport with an air of official authority, as though preparing to uncover some elaborate fraud. He studied the boarding pass displayed on the screen, comparing it to her passport with exaggerated care. "Dr. Alexandria Wilson," he read aloud, emphasizing the title with subtle skepticism. "And you're traveling to Geneva today in Seat 2A, Celestial First Class." "That's correct." Alexandria confirmed, maintaining her composure despite the unnecessary repetition of information clearly displayed on her boarding pass. Thomas exchanged a glance with Rachel, a silent communication that spoke volumes. "This seems irregular," he said, turning back to Alexandria. "Our first-class manifest doesn't typically include last-minute changes." "There was no change," Alexandria replied. "This reservation was made 3 weeks ago." Rachel leaned toward Thomas, speaking in a stage whisper that was meant to be overheard. "The system was glitchy earlier. Maybe there was an error in the class assignment." Alexandria's expression remained impassive, but she was mentally documenting every word, every implication. This wasn't just poor customer service. It was a deliberate attempt to discredit her legitimate status as a first-class passenger based solely on appearance. Thomas tapped at the computer terminal, making a show of checking the system. "I'm not seeing any payment verification for this booking level," he said, though there was no way the basic gate terminal would display such information. "I assure you," Alexandria said, her voice cooler, now the ticket was purchased properly and full weeks ago. Thomas gave her a condescending smile. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps you were waitlisted for an upgrade that didn't clear." That happens quite often. Behind Alexandria, the line was growing restless. Michael Reyes checked his watch pointedly. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. Lucia Mendez had positioned herself near a charging station with a clear view of the confrontation. Her phone was still recording, and she had already begun a live stream on her Instagram account, captioning it, "Watching racial profiling happen in real time at JFK. Black woman with first-class ticket being hassled for verification." The view count was climbing rapidly, 57, 89, 142 viewers joining to witness what was unfolding. Alexandria made a subtle movement, reaching for her phone. "If you're questioning the validity of my ticket, I should probably contact Meridian customer service directly." Thomas hesitated, then reluctantly handed the phone back. "That won't be necessary. We can handle this here." Alexandria didn't put her phone away. Instead, she made a call. "Gabriella, it's me. Yes, I'm still at the gate." Her voice was calm, professional. "It seems there's a question about my reservation status. Yes, Protocol Insight should be activated now. Document everything from timestamp 11:42 a.m. Eastern." Rachel and Thomas exchanged concerned glances. The mention of documentation and timestamps had shifted the dynamic subtly. "Ma'am," Thomas said, his tone sharper now. "Who are you calling?" "My executive assistant, Alexandria," replied simply. "This is a boarding issue, not a business matter," Rachel interjected, her voice rising slightly. "We need to move this line along." "I agree completely," Alexandria said, ending her call. "I've been attempting to board for nearly 15 minutes now." Thomas's expression hardened. Ma'am, if you're going to be difficult, we can always have you rebooked on a later flight. It was a threat, plain and simple comply or lose your seat. It was also a policy violation, as Meridian's own rules prohibited rebooking passengers without consent, except in cases of security concerns. Alexandria's response was measured but firm. I would strongly advise against that course of action, Mr. Wilson. The use of his name, which Alexandria had read from his badge, startled Thomas momentarily. He was accustomed to being the authority figure, not the one being addressed with such composed confidence. From the periphery, a new voice entered the confrontation. "Excuse me, what's happening here?" A younger Latina woman in a Meridian uniform approached her name badge reading Daniela Ramirez. She was clearly a junior gate agent, perhaps in her late 20s, but her expression showed genuine concern. Rachel turned to her with obvious irritation. "Daniela, we've got this handled. Return to gate B26, please." Daniela hesitated, her eyes moving from Rachel to Alexandria and back again. "The supervisor at B26 sent me to help with the backlog. You're running behind schedule." Thomas stepped closer to Daniela, lowering his voice, but still audible to those nearby. "This is a verification issue. We'll handle it." Daniela glanced at Alexandria's passport still in Thomas's hand, then at the boarding pass displayed on Alexandria's phone, which was clearly visible. Her expression shifted as understanding dawned. "This appears to be a valid first-class boarding pass," she said carefully. Thomas's face tightened. "Daniela, you're new here. There are protocols for verification that you're not familiar with." "Actually," Daniela replied, her voice respectful but firm, "I completed the verification training last month. According to procedure, if the boarding pass and ID match and the system accepts the scan, the passenger should be allowed to board." Rachel stepped forward, physically positioning herself between Daniela and Alexandria. "That's enough. Return to your assigned gate immediately." Daniela's eyes met Alexandria's briefly, an apologetic glance that spoke volumes. She hesitated, clearly torn between following direct orders and addressing an injustice happening right in front of her. "If you interfere with this verification, your probationary period might need to be extended." Thomas added his tone, making the threat clear. Alexandria observed this exchange with keen interest. The dynamics within Meridian's staff were now as much a part of her evaluation as the original discrimination. "It's fine," Alexandria told Daniela quietly. "I appreciate your attention to proper procedure." Daniela nodded, slightly reluctance evident in her expression as she stepped back. But she didn't leave the gate area entirely, instead positioning herself at an adjacent computer terminal where she could still observe. Thomas turned his attention back to Alexandria, his demeanor now more aggressive after being challenged by a subordinate. "Ma'am, we're going to need to take your boarding pass for further verification. In the meantime, please step aside so others can board." "You want to take my phone?" Alexandria asked incredulously. "We can print a temporary paper boarding pass for verification purposes," Rachel explained with false sweetness. "Standard procedure." It was, in fact, not standard procedure at all. Alexandria's calm was unshakable, but her voice took on a new edge of authority. "You will not be taking my personal property. If you have questions about my boarding pass, you may scan it now, as is standard procedure." Thomas stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. "Ma'am, if you refuse to comply with security procedures—" "These are not security procedures." Alexandria interrupted, her voice level, but powerful enough to cause nearby passengers to turn and stare. "They are discriminatory practices being applied selectively. And yes, I'm fully aware of the distinction." The air around the gate desk crackled with tension. Rachel's face had flushed red, while Thomas's expression had hardened into something ugly. Alexandria reached for her phone again, dialing with deliberate movements. "Gabriella, it's me again. Please note the time 12:03 p.m. The gate agents are now attempting to confiscate my phone under the guise of verification. Please activate Phase 2 of Protocol Insight. Yes, full documentation. Thank you." Lucia Mendez, still recording, had moved closer. Her live stream had now reached over 5,000 viewers, with comments flooding in expressing outrage at what they were witnessing. "Excuse me?" Lucia called out, her phone visibly recording. "I'm a social media manager and I'm documenting this incident. May I ask why this passenger is being treated differently from others who have boarded first class?" Thomas turned sharply. "Recording is not permitted in the gate area without authorization." "Actually," Lucia replied confidently, "JFK Terminal 4's public areas have no prohibition on recording as confirmed by Port Authority regulations. I checked before I started streaming." The confrontation had now drawn a small crowd. Other passengers were murmuring among themselves, many looking uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Michael Reyes had pulled out his own phone, typing rapidly, later revealed to be an email to Meridian's customer service department with the subject line "Witnessing discrimination at Gate B24 Flight MA107. Alexandria remained the calmest person in the vicinity, standing with perfect posture, her expression composed but resolute. "Mr. Wilson," she said, addressing Thomas directly and Ms. Morgan, nodding toward Rachel. "I'm going to make this very simple. You have two options at this point. You can scan my boarding pass, verify my identity as you would any other passenger, and allow me to board the aircraft I have a legitimate ticket for. Or you can continue this discriminatory treatment and deal with the consequences." Thomas bristled at the direct challenge to his authority. "Are you threatening airline staff? That's a federal offense." Alexandria's smile was small but unwavering. "I'm simply informing you of the choice before you. As for threats, I believe the only threats made so far have been directed at me and at Ms. Ramirez." Rachel stepped forward, physically blocking Alexandria from moving toward the gate. "You're holding up the entire boarding process. Either comply with our verification or step aside." "I have complied," Alexandria replied calmly. "I've shown my boarding pass and identification. No other passenger has been subjected to this level of verification. The only difference is clear to everyone watching. It was 12:07 p.m., exactly 7 minutes before everything would change. The confrontation had reached its breaking point. In the balance hung not just Alexandria's dignity, but a moment of truth for Meridian Airways itself. 16 years earlier, Alexandria Wilson had stood in another airport facing another gate agent with the same dismissive expression. She had been 26 then, fresh from defending her doctoral dissertation in aerospace engineering, boarding a flight to a job interview with a leading aircraft manufacturer. She had saved for months to purchase the business class ticket, knowing appearance mattered for the interview. Despite her pressed suit and polished shoes, the gate agent had taken one look at her and said, "Economy boarding isn't for another 30 minutes. When Alexandria had presented her business class boarding pass, the agent had scrutinized it with obvious suspicion, finally waving her through with a muttered, "Must be your lucky day." It wasn't luck. It was the result of years of study sacrifice and extraordinary effort. Alexandria had graduated top of her class at MIT, earning a full scholarship after growing up in a middle-class household in Atlanta where her father worked as a mechanical engineer and her mother as a high school mathematics teacher. Her parents had instilled in her not just a love of learning, but a profound sense of dignity. "Never let anyone make you feel small," her father had told her. "Your worth isn't determined by their perception." After that humiliating experience, Alexandria had vowed two things to reach a position where her accomplishments couldn't be dismissed, and to eventually create change in industries where such treatment was commonplace. She'd gone on to secure that job designing lightweight composite materials for aircraft wings that reduced fuel consumption by 3.8%, a revolutionary advancement that caught the attention of NASA. During her 3 years there, she'd developed innovations in heat shield technology that earned her multiple patents and laid the groundwork for what would become Skyward Innovations. Starting with a small business loan and her own savings, Alexandria had launched her company in a modest office space in Seattle. Her first contract had been to retrofit a regional airlines fleet of 10 aircraft with her fuel-saving wing modifications, a risk for the airline, but one that paid off dramatically when they reported a 14% reduction in operating costs over the first year. Word had spread. Within 3 years, Skyward had contracts with 4 major airlines. By year 5, they were designing proprietary systems for some of the largest aircraft manufacturers in the world. When Alexandria made the strategic decision to expand into aircraft leasing, combining engineering innovation with ownership, Skyward's growth had exploded. Now 12 years after founding Skyward Innovations, Alexandria Wilson controlled a fleet of over 300 aircraft leased to airlines around the world, all equipped with her company's cutting-edge technology. The company employed thousands, including some of the finest engineering minds in the industry, and maintained offices in Seattle, Singapore, Zurich, and Dubai. Through it all, Alexandria had maintained her practice of flying anonymously on her leased aircraft, experiencing the service as any passenger would. She'd implemented Protocol Insight 5 years ago after witnessing repeated instances of discrimination against passengers of color, particularly in premium cabins. The protocol was simple but effective document. Everything gather evidence methodically and use it not just for individual redress, but for structural change. It wasn't about public shaming or viral moments, though those sometimes happened, but about creating accountability systems that outlasted news cycles. In the past 3 years alone, Protocol Insight had led to comprehensive retraining at 2 major airlines, the implementation of anti-bias protocols at multiple airports, and the establishment of independent review boards for passenger complaints related to discrimination. Alexandria didn't want apologies. She wanted change, permanent, measurable, verifiable change, that would ensure the next generation of travelers wouldn't face the same barriers and indignities. As she stood at Gate B24, now facing Rachel Morgan and Thomas Wilson, Alexandria wasn't just drawing on her personal authority as the owner of the aircraft they were attempting to bar her from boarding. She was drawing on years of methodical work addressing precisely this type of incident. And she was prepared. Her calm wasn't just temperament, though she was naturally level-headed. It was strategy. Her documentation wasn't just for this moment, but for the policy revisions that would follow. Her composure wasn't just dignity, but purpose. Alexandria checked her watch again, 12:08 p.m. The confrontation had been ongoing for nearly half an hour. First-class boarding was nearly complete, yet she still stood at the gate passport in Thomas's hand, boarding pass questioned despite its obvious legitimacy. This wasn't just about getting to her seat anymore. It was about ensuring that the next person who looked like her wouldn't have to face the same obstacle. It was about the responsibility that came with her position not just as CEO of Skyward Innovations, but as someone with the power to effect genuine change. Alexandria took a deep breath and prepared for what would come next. The moment when patience transformed into power. The moment when her identity would shift from presumed outsider to the ultimate insider. The moment was now. "This has gone on long enough," Thomas declared, his patience visibly fraying. "Ma'am, please step aside and let the legitimate first-class passengers board." The word legitimate hung in the air like a slap. Around the gate area, several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Lucia's live-stream comment section was exploding with outrage, the viewer count now approaching 7,000. Alexandria's eyes narrowed slightly, the first real sign that her legendary composure might have limits. "Mr. Wilson, I'd like you to clarify what you mean by legitimate in this context." Thomas faltered momentarily, aware he'd stepped into dangerous territory. "I simply meant verified passengers with confirmed first-class reservations." "My reservation is confirmed," Alexandria replied evenly. "My identity has been verified. The only variable here seems to be your unwillingness to accept that someone who looks like me belongs in first class." Rachel stepped forward aggressively. "That's not true. This has nothing to do with how you look." Her voice was too loud, too defensive, making the lie transparent. Then scan my boarding pass, Alexandria challenged, holding out her phone again. It takes 3 seconds. Thomas exchanged a glance with Rachel, clearly realizing they'd backed themselves into a corner. Either they admitted their bias by continuing to refuse, or they scanned the pass and revealed there had never been a legitimate issue. We need to move this line along, Thomas said, attempting to reassert control. Security will escort you to customer service to sort this out. It was a desperate escalation, calling security on a passenger who had done nothing wrong except challenge their authority. Alexandria's voice remained calm, but took on a new note of finality. Before you make that call, I want to be absolutely clear about what's happening. You are refusing to allow a ticketed first-class passenger to board based on discriminatory assumptions. You've threatened a junior employee who attempted to follow proper procedure. You're now threatening to have me removed by security for simply insisting on my right to board. All of this is being documented, witnessed, and live-streamed. Are you certain this is the path you want to take? Thomas hesitated, his hand hovering over the radio. Rachel glared at Alexandria with undisguised hostility. From the periphery, Daniela Ramirez stepped forward again. Thomas, I've checked the manifest. Dr. Wilson is confirmed in seat 2A. The system shows a valid ticket purchased 23 days ago. Thomas turned on her sharply. I told you to stay out of this. I'm doing my job, Daniela replied, a tremor in her voice betraying her nervousness, but her resolve firm. Meridian procedures require me to ensure proper boarding. Dr. Wilson's documentation is in order. You're on probation, Daniela, Rachel hissed. This could cost you your job. Daniela swallowed hard but stood her ground. If following proper procedure costs me my job, then perhaps this isn't the right workplace for me. Alexandria observed this exchange with interest. Courage often emerged from unexpected places, and Daniela's willingness to risk her position spoke volumes about her character. Your name is Daniela Ramirez? Alexandria asked directly. Daniela nodded clearly, nervous but determined. Thank you for your professionalism, Ms. Ramirez. Thomas's face had darkened with anger. That's enough. I'm calling security. He reached for his radio again. Alexandria made one more call. Gabriella, please note the time, 12:10 p.m. The gate supervisor is now threatening to call security to remove me from a flight I have a legitimate ticket for. Please activate the executive protocol. Yes, immediately. The mention of an executive protocol caused Thomas to hesitate again, but his pride was now too invested to back down. Security to gate B24, he spoke into the radio. Passenger compliance issue. Alexandria didn't flinch. Instead, she addressed the growing crowd of onlookers directly. I would like everyone present to note that I have presented valid identification and a confirmed first-class ticket. I have remained calm and cooperative. The only issue appears to be that I don't match these gate agents' image of who belongs in first class. Michael Reyes, still waiting in line, spoke up. I'm a witness to all of this. This treatment is completely unacceptable. An older white woman who had been observing from nearby nodded in agreement. I've been flying Meridian for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Disgraceful. Thomas looked increasingly uncomfortable as public opinion solidified against him. Rachel, however, doubled down. You're disrupting the boarding process, she snapped at Alexandria, and inciting other passengers. I'm simply stating facts, Alexandria replied. Facts that numerous witnesses and cameras are documenting. Lucia Mendez had positioned herself for a clearer angle, her live stream now at over 10,000 viewers. The hashtag #CoachOnly was already trending locally on social media platforms. Alexandria's phone rang. She answered calmly. Yes, Gabriella. Proceed. She listened for a moment, then nodded. Perfect timing. As she ended the call, Alexandria's demeanor shifted subtly. She stood a little straighter, her eyes a little sharper. The transformation was barely perceptible, but somehow the air around her seemed to change. Mr. Wilson, she said, her voice taking on a new note of authority that made Thomas blink in surprise. Before security arrives, I think it's time we clarified exactly who you're attempting to remove from this flight. Thomas's expression wavered between defiance and the first flickers of uncertainty. Your identity isn't the issue. Your compliance is. On the contrary, Alexandria replied. My identity is precisely what this entire confrontation has been about from the moment Ms. Morgan decided I didn't look like a first-class passenger. She extended her hand. I'll need my passport back now. Thomas hesitated, then reluctantly handed it over, a look of confusion crossing his face at her sudden change in demeanor. Alexandria took the passport, tucked it into her bag, and then looked directly at Thomas and Rachel. The moment had arrived. My name is Dr. Alexandria Wilson, she said, her voice clear and carrying across the gate area. I am the founder and CEO of Skyward Innovations. My company owns every wide-body aircraft in Meridian Airways' international fleet, including the A350-1000 that we're all meant to be boarding right now. The silence that followed was absolute. It was 12:12 p.m., the moment everything changed. Rachel's face drained of color. Thomas froze his mouth slightly open. Around them, passengers who had been watching the confrontation unfold gasped or murmured in shock. That's not possible, Rachel stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. Alexandria smiled slightly. I assure you it is. The aircraft registration number is NSWI. Skyward Innovations has leased 82 aircraft to Meridian Airways under a $3.6 billion contract that was renewed just last year. You might want to check with your corporate office. I believe they're trying to reach you rather urgently right now. As if on cue, the desk phone at the gate began to ring. Daniela moved to answer it, her eyes wide. Gate B-24. This is Daniela Ramirez, she said. Then listened for a moment. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. She looked up at Thomas and Rachel, her face pale. It's Mr. Harrington, from corporate. He needs to speak with you immediately. Thomas reached for the phone with visible reluctance, already sensing what was coming. This is Thomas Wilson, he said, his voice noticeably less confident. Even from several feet away, Alexandria could hear the panic in the voice coming through the receiver. Thomas's face went from pale to ashen as he listened. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. She's right here. He looked at Alexandria, a new recognition in his eyes, not just of who she was, but of the magnitude of his error. Yes, sir. Right away. He held out the phone to Alexandria, his hand visibly trembling. Ms. Dr. Wilson, James Harrington, our CEO, would like to speak with you. Alexandria took the phone calmly. James. Yes, I'm still at the gate. She listened for a moment. No, I haven't boarded yet. Your staff felt I didn't look like I belonged in first class. Another pause. Yes, it's been fully documented. I'll have Gabriella send you the timestamps and witness information. She glanced at her watch. I understand you're on your way to the airport now. Good. We have a great deal to discuss about Meridian's corporate culture. One final pause. I'll wait for you in the Celestial Lounge. The aircraft isn't going anywhere without my authorization anyway. She handed the phone back to Thomas, whose face now showed the dawning horror of someone who suddenly understood the full consequences of his actions. Around the gate area, the news was spreading rapidly from passenger to passenger. Lucia's live stream comment section was exploding with reactions, the view count now over 20,000 and climbing by the second. Dr. Wilson owns the plane. They tried to kick the owner off her own aircraft. Meridian is finished. Rachel stood frozen, her earlier arrogance replaced by naked fear. We were just following procedures. Were you? Alexandria asked, her tone measured but unyielding. Please point out the procedure that directs you to make assumptions about passengers based on their appearance rather than their documentation. Rachel had no answer. Thomas attempted damage control. Dr. Wilson, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If we had known who you were, that's precisely the problem. Mr. Wilson. Alexandria cut him off. Your behavior shouldn't change based on who you think someone is. Every passenger deserves the same respect and adherence to proper procedure. She turned to address the crowd of onlookers. Wouldn't you agree? The response was immediate and emphatic nods, murmurs of agreement, and several loud, "Absolutely." Alexandria turned back to Thomas and Rachel. I'll be waiting for James in the lounge. I suggest you both prepare for a detailed discussion about today's events. Ms. Ramirez, she added, looking at Daniela, would you be kind enough to escort me back to the lounge? I believe we have some matters to discuss as well. Daniela nodded, still processing what had just transpired. Of course, Dr. Wilson. As Alexandria turned to leave, she paused and addressed the first-class passengers still waiting to board. My sincere apologies for the delay. I imagine boarding will resume shortly under new supervision. With that, she walked away from the gate, Daniela at her side, leaving Thomas and Rachel to face the wreckage of their careers and the dawning recognition that they had just provided a textbook example of the prejudice that still plagued the airline industry. It was 12:15 p.m. The confrontation was over, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. The revelation of Alexandria's identity hit the gate area like a thunderclap. Passengers who had been watching the confrontation unfold now stared in stunned silence as she walked away with Daniela, her dignity intact, her authority unquestioned. Thomas Wilson stood frozen behind the desk, the phone still in his hand. The voice of CEO James Harrington still audible now, shouting on the other end. Rachel Morgan had collapsed into a nearby chair, her face ashen, the reality of what had just happened beginning to sink in. She owns the planes. Rachel whispered more to herself than anyone else. She owns the actual aircraft. Michael Reyes, who had witnessed the entire confrontation, stepped up to the counter. I believe we're still supposed to be boarding, he said pointedly, holding out his boarding pass. Thomas nodded mechanically, scanning the pass without really seeing it. His mind was elsewhere, calculating the depth of the hole he had just dug for himself and his career. Meanwhile, Lucia Mendez was wrapping up her live stream, which had now been viewed by over 35,000 people and was being rapidly shared across multiple platforms. So that's what happened, everyone, she narrated. They tried to keep a black woman out of first class because she didn't look like she belonged there, and it turned out she literally owns the entire fleet of planes. I'll keep you updated as this develops, but right now the CEO of Meridian Airways is apparently racing to the airport for damage control. Don't forget to follow for updates. #CoachOnly, #Meridian Airways, #Own the Fleet. As news of what had happened spread through the terminal, passengers pulled out phones searching for information about Skyward Innovations and Alexandria Wilson. Social media platforms were already buzzing with reactions, many expressing outrage at the treatment Alexandria had received, others sharing similar experiences they'd faced while traveling. Back in the Celestial Lounge, Alexandria sat calmly at a corner table, her phone to her ear. Yes, Gabriella, the full documentation package, she was saying. All the timestamps, the witness statements when available, and the live stream recording. Have legal prepare the contract amendment draft with the new accountability provisions we discussed last month. This is precisely the scenario we anticipated. She paused, listening to Gabriella's response. No, I don't want Rachel Morgan or Thomas Wilson charged with anything. This isn't about punishing individuals, it's about changing a culture. They're symptoms, not the disease. Another pause. James Harrington is on his way. Estimated arrival in 20 minutes. Yes, the Geneva meeting will need to be pushed back. Contact Jacob and explain the situation. He'll understand he's been on the receiving end of similar treatment. Alexandria ended the call and looked up to find Daniela Ramirez standing nearby, clearly unsure whether to approach or maintain a professional distance. "Please sit," Ms. Ramirez Alexandria said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Daniela sat, her posture tense with anxiety. "Dr. Wilson, I want to apologize for what happened. I should have intervened sooner." Alexandria studied her thoughtfully. "You did intervene, Ms. Ramirez, despite threats to your job security and clear hostility from your superiors. That took courage." "Not enough courage," Daniela replied, looking down. "I should have been more assertive. May I ask how long you've worked for Meridian?" 6 months, Daniela answered. "I'm still on probation." Alexandria nodded. "And yet you were the only one who attempted to follow proper procedure rather than making assumptions. Tell me what made you speak up when it might have cost you your position." Daniela hesitated, then met Alexandria's gaze directly. "My mother taught me that staying silent in the face of injustice makes you complicit in it. I saw what was happening, what Rachel and Thomas were doing, and I couldn't pretend I didn't, even knowing it might have consequences for you professionally. Some things are more important than a job," Daniela said simply. Alexandria smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her composed features. "I couldn't agree more, Ms. Ramirez. Some things are indeed more important than a job. Integrity, for instance." Before their conversation could continue, a commotion at the lounge entrance drew their attention. James Harrington, CEO of Meridian Airways, had arrived 20 minutes earlier than expected, having clearly broken several speed limits to get there. At 58, Harrington was a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver hair and the harried expression of someone whose day had just imploded. He scanned the lounge frantically until his eyes landed on Alexandria. The relief on his face at finding her still there was palpable. He hurried over, extending his hand. "Dr. Wilson, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for the inexcusable treatment you experienced." He began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I assure you this is not reflective of Meridian's values or policies. The employees involved have been removed from duty pending termination proceedings." Alexandria regarded him steadily, neither taking his hand nor inviting him to sit. "Values are demonstrated through actions, James, not policy documents. What happened today wasn't an aberration. It was the logical outcome of a culture that permits bias to go unchecked." Harrington's hand dropped awkwardly. "I understand your frustration, but I assure you this was an isolated incident." "It wasn't," Alexandria interrupted calmly. "And characterizing it that way is part of the problem. Ms. Ramirez." She turned to Daniela. "In your 6 months at Meridian, have you witnessed similar instances of profiling or discriminatory treatment?" Daniela glanced nervously between Alexandria and Harrington, clearly torn between honesty and self-preservation. "You can speak freely," Alexandria assured her. "Your position is not at risk." Harrington nodded quickly in agreement, though his expression suggested he was less certain of that guarantee. Daniela took a deep breath. "Yes, I've seen it repeatedly. Not always as blatant as today, but it happens. Certain passengers get extra scrutiny longer, wait times, more questions about upgrades or premium cabin access. There's no written policy, but there's a pattern." Harrington's face flushed. "That's a serious allegation." "It's not an allegation," Alexandria cut in. "It's an observation from one of your employees consistent with data my team has been gathering for the past 3 years on 14 major airlines, including Meridian." She pulled out her tablet, opening a document. "During our lease period, we've documented 147 incidents of apparent bias in Meridian's premium cabin boarding procedures. Today's was simply the most blatant." She turned the tablet toward Harrington, showing a meticulously documented spreadsheet with dates, times, gate numbers, and brief descriptions of incidents. "This?" "I had no idea," Harrington stammered, his face paling as he scrolled through the data. Ignorance is not an acceptable excuse when you're responsible for corporate culture, Alexandria replied, especially when these incidents impact customer experience, brand reputation, and ultimately shareholder value. Harrington winced at the mention of shareholder value, a clear reminder of the business relationship between Skyward Innovations and Meridian Airways and the leverage Alexandria possessed. "What can we do to make this right?" he asked, his tone now more subdued. Alexandria closed the tablet. "That's the first sensible question you've asked. The answer is both simple and challenging. You change your culture comprehensively and verifiably. Of course, we'll implement additional training immediately. Training is a start, but inadequate on its own." Alexandria interrupted. "What's required is a structural overhaul of how Meridian hires, trains, evaluates, and promotes its customer-facing staff. It requires transparent reporting of passenger complaints related to bias, independent auditing of response times and resolution outcomes, and measurable consequences for leadership when patterns emerge." Harrington looked stunned at the scope of what Alexandria was proposing. "That would be unprecedented." "So was barring the owner of your aircraft from boarding," Alexandria replied evenly. "Unprecedented circumstances call for unprecedented responses." She reached into her bag and handed him a folder that Gabriella had prepared weeks earlier, anticipating exactly this type of incident. "This document outlines the Wilson Accountability Framework. My legal team will be in touch with yours to implement it as an addendum to our leasing contract. Non-compliance will trigger a review clause that could result in early termination of the lease arrangements." Harrington took the folder with visible trepidation. "Dr. Wilson, while I appreciate your concerns, this seems rather extreme for one unfortunate incident, 147 documented incidents," Alexandria corrected him, "plus countless others experienced by passengers without my resources or determination. This isn't negotiable, James. It's happening. The only question is whether Meridian embraces the change or resists it." She stood, signaling that the conversation was concluding. "I'm rescheduling my trip to Geneva for tomorrow. In the meantime, I suggest you begin reading that framework document and preparing your board for a significant culture shift." Harrington also rose, still clutching the folder. "What about the public relations aspect of this situation? The incident has already gone viral." Alexandria regarded him thoughtfully. "Meridian has two choices: get ahead of the story by announcing comprehensive reforms, or play defense while the narrative spirals beyond your control. I know which approach I'd recommend." And Thomas and Rachel Harrington asked cautiously, "As I said earlier, they're symptoms of a broader problem. Their fate is your decision, but I would strongly advise against making them scapegoats while leaving the underlying issues unaddressed." Alexandria gathered her belongings, preparing to leave. "One more thing, James. Ms. Ramirez demonstrated exceptional integrity today at considerable professional risk. I suggest you consider what that says about her character and potential value to your organization." Daniela looked surprised at being mentioned, and even more surprised when Alexandria handed her a business card. "If your current career path doesn't work out, Ms. Ramirez, Skyward Innovations is always looking for people of integrity. Please call that number directly if you're ever interested." With that, Alexandria Wilson walked out of the lounge, leaving behind a shaken CEO, a thoughtful junior employee, and the first tremors of what would become a seismic shift in airline culture. It was 12:45 p.m. The revelation was complete, but the transformation was just beginning. The scene at Gate B24 had transformed from a routine boarding process into something resembling a corporate crisis center. Thomas Wilson and Rachel Morgan had been quietly removed from the gate and escorted to a private office where they now waited in tense silence for what would inevitably be a termination meeting. In their place, a senior customer service manager named Robert Phillips had been hastily dispatched from another terminal. He was now profusely apologizing to each first-class passenger as they finally boarded the delayed flight, offering complimentary amenity kits and premium beverage vouchers as token compensation for the wait. "We sincerely apologize for the delay," he repeated mechanically, his forehead damp with stress sweat. Meridian Airways is committed to providing an excellent experience for all our valued passengers. The irony of his words was lost on no one who had witnessed the previous confrontation. Several passengers accepted the apologies with tight smiles and thinly veiled skepticism. Others were more direct in their criticism. "You should be apologizing to Dr. Wilson, not us," Michael Reyes commented as he finally boarded nearly 40 minutes after he should have. "Yes, sir," Robert agreed quickly. "Management is addressing that situation at the highest levels." Meanwhile, the video of the confrontation had exploded across social media platforms. Lucia Mendez's live stream had been viewed over 120,000 times and was being picked up by news outlets. The hashtag #CoachOnly was trending nationally, along with #OwnTheFleet and #Meridian Airways. Corporate communications staff at Meridian's headquarters were frantically drafting statements trying to get ahead of the rapidly developing public relations crisis. Early headlines were already appearing on news sites. Black executive denied first-class boarding on her own aircraft. Airline faces backlash. After gate agents profile owner of their fleet viral video shows Meridian Airways staff attempting to remove CEO from first class in the Celestial Lounge. James Harrington was on his third consecutive emergency call, this time with the chairman of Meridian's board of directors, Sir Richard Blackwell. The social media exposure is growing exponentially. Harrington explained, pacing nervously. "Wilson is insisting on comprehensive reforms, not just a public apology. Can we afford to refuse?" "Sir Richard?" asked, his British accent clipped with concern. Harrington glanced down at the folder Alexandria had given him, the Wilson Accountability Framework document now open on the table. "Frankly, no. Skyward owns 82 of our aircraft. If they invoke the morality clause in the leasing contract, we'd lose half our international capacity overnight. And Wilson is insisting on these reforms." "Yes. She's had this framework prepared in advance. It's extremely detailed. Mandatory bias training, anonymous testing, independent auditing of passenger complaints, leadership, accountability metrics. It's extensive." Sir Richard sighed heavily. "The board won't be pleased about the cost implications, but it appears we have little choice. Implement whatever is necessary to contain this situation, James. We cannot afford to lose those aircraft." "Understood. I'll call an emergency management meeting for this evening." As Harrington ended the call, his assistant approached with yet another urgent message. "Sir, CNN is requesting a statement. They're running the story in their next hour." Harrington closed his eyes briefly, feeling the situation slipping further out of control with each passing minute. "Tell them we're preparing a comprehensive response and will issue a statement shortly." Meanwhile, Alexandria had taken a car back to her hotel, the Peninsula, in Midtown Manhattan. She sat in the back seat, calmly making a series of calls that would reshape Meridian Airways for years to come. "Jacob, it's Alexandria. Yes, I'll be delayed until tomorrow. Something came up that requires my attention." She paused, listening. "No, the acquisition is still proceeding as planned. This is a separate matter involving one of our leasing clients. Have your team review the accountability framework document I'm having Gabriella send over. We'll be implementing it at Meridian immediately and potentially extending it to other clients." After ending that call, she contacted her legal team. "Martin, I need the contract amendment drafted by this evening. Yes, the full framework. Harrington has received the outline, but he'll need the legal language before their board meeting tomorrow." She listened for a moment. "No, we're not terminating the lease, we're improving it. This is about creating lasting change, not punishment." Her third call was to Gabriella. "I need you to activate our audit team. Full review of passenger experience metrics across all our leasing clients, prioritizing incidents similar to what happened today. She nodded at the response. Exactly. We've been collecting this data for years now. We're going to use it. As the car pulled up to the peninsula, Alexandria was met by the hotel manager who had clearly been alerted to her arrival. Dr. Wilson, welcome back, he said, opening her door personally. We've prepared your usual suite. Is there anything you require this afternoon? A meeting room for 6 people at 4 p.m., Alexandria replied. And please ensure we won't be disturbed. Of course, Dr. Wilson. The Windsor room will be prepared immediately. In her suite, Alexandria took a moment to center herself. The day had unfolded in ways that were both unexpected and paradoxically exactly as she had anticipated might eventually happen. She had experienced similar treatment countless times throughout her career, though rarely so blatant or with so many witnesses. She opened her laptop and typed a brief email to her executive leadership team. Today's incident at JFK provides us with the opportunity to implement the accountability framework we've been developing. Meridian Airways will be our first test case. I'm calling an emergency strategy session at 4 p.m. Eastern. Please join remotely if you cannot attend in person. This is not just about addressing one incident of discrimination. It's about creating a template for industry-wide reform that we can implement across our entire client portfolio. By 3 p.m., Alexandria's inbox was flooded with messages from industry colleagues expressing support from news outlets requesting comments from Meridian executives attempting damage control. She responded to none of them, focusing instead on refining the implementation strategy for the framework. At precisely 4 p.m., Alexandria walked into the Windsor room where her executive leadership team awaited some in person, others joining via secure video conference. The atmosphere was focused, professional, and purposeful. Good afternoon, Alexandria began. As many of you are aware, I experienced a significant incident of discrimination while attempting to board a Meridian Airways flight today. What you may not know is that this presents us with the perfect opportunity to implement the accountability measures we've been developing for the past 2 years. She activated a presentation on the room's display screen showing the key elements of the Wilson Accountability Framework. Meridian Airways will serve as our prototype for this implementation. Their CEO has already received the outline, and our legal team is preparing the contract amendments. We anticipate some resistance to the more comprehensive measures, but their leverage in this situation is minimal. Alexandria moved through the presentation methodically, detailing the implementation timeline, resource requirements, and expected outcomes. This isn't about punishing Meridian, she emphasized. It's about creating a template that we can scale across all our client relationships. Today's incident may have involved me personally, but similar experiences happen to passengers every day who lack the resources or platform to address them effectively. As the meeting concluded, Alexandria assigned specific responsibilities to each team member, establishing clear deadlines and accountability measures for the framework's implementation. We move quickly but methodically, she instructed. This isn't a reactive PR exercise. It's a strategic initiative that's been years in planning. The incident today merely accelerated our timeline. By 6 p.m., as evening settled over Manhattan, the immediate aftermath of the confrontation was giving way to the first phase of transformative action. Alexandria Wilson hadn't just exposed discrimination at one airline gate, she had set in motion changes that would ripple through the entire industry. It was a response not of anger or vindictiveness, but of methodical, purposeful reform. Exactly the approach that had built Skyward Innovations from a startup into an industry powerhouse. As darkness fell over New York City, lights burned late in Meridian's corporate offices, where executives scrambled to address a crisis that was rapidly evolving into an existential reckoning. Meanwhile, in her hotel suite, Alexandria Wilson reviewed the final draft of the contract amendments, a slight smile playing at the corner of her mouth. This wasn't just an aftermath. It was a beginning. The emergency board meeting at Meridian Airways' London headquarters began at 7 a.m. local time, barely 18 hours after the incident. The tension in the wood-paneled boardroom was palpable as 12 executives and board members gathered around the massive table with James Harrington joining via video conference from New York. Sir Richard Blackwell, the 63-year-old chairman of the board, called the meeting to order with a grave expression. I believe we all understand the severity of the situation. James, please update us on developments since our call yesterday. Harrington's face on the large screen looked haggard from a sleepless night. The situation has escalated beyond our initial assessment. The video has now been viewed over 2 million times across platforms. Major news outlets are running the story. Our stock price dropped 7% in after-hours trading, and analysts are projecting a further decline when markets open. He paused, taking a sip of water. Dr. Wilson's legal team delivered the formal contract amendments an hour ago. They're extensive. Victoria Palmer, Meridian's chief financial officer, spoke up. What exactly is Wilson demanding? Harrington shared his screen displaying the document. It's called the Wilson Accountability Framework. In essence, it requires us to implement comprehensive reforms in how we train staff, handle customer complaints related to discrimination, and hold leadership accountable for measurable improvements. The cost implications Palmer pressed. Initial implementation estimated at $18 million with ongoing annual costs of approximately $4 million for auditing, training, and compliance. A murmur ran around the table. Palmer's expression tightened. That's nearly 40% of our projected profit for the quarter. The alternative is worse, Harrington countered. If Wilson invokes the morality clause and terminates the leasing arrangement, we lose 82 aircraft overnight. The resulting chaos would cost us hundreds of millions, not to mention irreparable brand damage. Malcolm Reed, the chief operations officer, leaned forward. Could we fight this legally? The morality clause was never intended to be leveraged this way. Priya Sharma, Meridian's general counsel, shook her head firmly. I've reviewed the contract language thoroughly. The clause is broad enough that Wilson's case would likely prevail, especially given the public nature of the incident and clear documentation of discriminatory treatment. Fighting this would only prolong the PR damage and ultimately result in the same outcome, except with additional legal costs and an even more hostile relationship with Skyward. Sir Richard drummed his fingers on the table. What precisely does this framework entail? Harrington scrolled through the document. It's detailed, but the key elements include mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, independent auditing of passenger complaints related to discrimination, regular secret shopper testing using passengers of diverse backgrounds, leadership accountability metrics tied to executive compensation, and public reporting of progress. It's essentially a complete overhaul of our customer service culture, added Diana Brooks, the head of human resources. Some of these measures are actually quite progressive. Under different circumstances, we might have considered implementing them anyway. Malcolm Reed scoffed. Let's be honest, we're being strong-armed into this. We're being held accountable, Sir Richard corrected him sharply. 2 of our employees publicly humiliated the CEO of our most important business partner based solely on her appearance. That's not a PR problem. It's a fundamental failure of our corporate culture. The room fell silent. The question before us, Sir Richard continued after a moment, is not whether we implement these reforms, but how we do so in a way that demonstrates genuine commitment rather than mere compliance. Victoria Palmer sighed. The financial impact is significant, but manageable. The real challenge will be changing entrenched attitudes. Then perhaps those attitudes should not have become entrenched in the first place, Sir Richard replied. We've clearly failed in our oversight if this type of behavior is occurring within our organization. James Harrington cleared his throat. There's one more element to consider. Dr. Wilson has requested a penalty payment of $12 million to be directed toward funding the implementation of the framework. That's outrageous, Malcolm exclaimed. She's demanding we pay for our own punishment, Priya Sharma intervened. Actually, from a legal perspective, it's quite reasonable. The documented incident constitutes a clear breach of our service standards and potentially violates anti-discrimination laws. A settlement of this nature directed toward remediation rather than punitive damages could be considered quite favorable. Sir Richard nodded. The penalty is not negotiable. I take it? No, Harrington confirmed. Wilson was explicit that this part of the agreement is non-negotiable. The funds will be held in a dedicated account used exclusively for implementation of the framework measures and subject to independent auditing. After a lengthy discussion of the technical and financial details, Sir Richard called for a vote. The result was 9 in favor, 3 against. The resolution passes, Sir Richard declared. James, you're authorized to sign the amended agreement. Let's be clear, this is not merely about preserving our business relationship with Skyward Innovations. It's about addressing a genuine failing within our organization. I expect full commitment to both the letter and spirit of these reforms. As the meeting concluded, the board members departed with solemn expressions, aware that Meridian Airways had just committed to a transformation that would fundamentally alter its corporate culture. Meanwhile, in Geneva, Switzerland, Alexandria Wilson was concluding her previously postponed meeting with Jakob Mueller, the CEO of Alpine Tech Avionics, the company Skyward was acquiring. The contract terms are acceptable, Jakob said, signing the final page. I'm particularly pleased with the provisions for our engineering team to remain intact. Alexandria nodded. Your team's innovations in cockpit display technology were the primary reason for our interest. It would be counterproductive to disrupt the group dynamic that produced such excellent work. As they shook hands to conclude the deal, Jacob smiled. I must admit I was surprised to see you on the news yesterday. Your handling of the situation was impressive. Alexandria's expression remained neutral. It was necessary. The framework you're implementing at Meridian, will you be extending it to other airlines? Eventually, yes, Alexandria confirmed. This was always the plan. Yesterday's incident merely accelerated the timeline for the first implementation. Jacob's eyes widened slightly. You had this prepared in advance. Of course, Alexandria replied matter-of-factly. I've experienced similar treatment throughout my career, as have countless others. The difference is that I'm now in a position to create structural change rather than merely responding to individual incidents. After the meeting concluded, Alexandria returned to her hotel suite and joined a video conference with her team in New York. The Meridian board has approved the framework her legal counsel reported. Harrington signed the amended agreement 30 minutes ago. Alexandria nodded, unsurprised. And the public response, Gabriella displayed a series of metrics on screen. Social media sentiment is running approximately 87% in support of our actions. Major news outlets are covering the story, generally framing it as a watershed moment for corporate accountability. Several civil rights organizations have reached out requesting more information about the framework. And Meridian's initial statement, they've announced a comprehensive review of customer service procedures and additional training initiatives, Gabriella reported. Somewhat vague, but they've acknowledged the incident occurred and expressed regret. Alexandria considered this. That's insufficient. They need to be specific about the changes being implemented. Have our PR team draft a statement from me emphasizing that this isn't about one incident but about structural reform. We'll release it tomorrow if Meridian hasn't provided more substance by then. As the meeting continued, they reviewed the implementation timeline, the selection process for the independent auditors who would oversee the framework, and the development of training materials. This isn't just about Meridian Alexandria, reminded her team. We're establishing a template that will be refined and then scaled across our entire client portfolio. Every detail matters because we're creating a new standard for the industry. Later that evening, Alexandria sat alone in her hotel suite reviewing the day's developments. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Daniela Ramirez, Dr. Wilson. I wanted to let you know that I've been appointed to Meridian's new Passenger Experience Task Force. They've asked me to help develop improved training protocols based on what happened yesterday. Thank you for standing your ground. It's already making a difference. Alexandria smiled her first genuine smile since the confrontation had begun. This was what real change looked like, not just policies on paper, but new voices at the table, new perspectives being valued. She typed a response. "Thank you for letting me know, Ms. Ramirez. Your integrity yesterday earned you this opportunity. Make the most of it." As night fell over Geneva, the consequences of what had begun as a simple act of discrimination continued to ripple outward, transforming not just one airline, but potentially an entire industry's approach to bias and accountability. This wasn't the end of the story. It was barely the beginning. 1 week after the incident at JFK Alexandria, Wilson sat in her Seattle office reviewing the first implementation report from Meridian Airways. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sleek, minimalist space that served as the command center for Skyward Innovations' global operations. The report on her tablet detailed the initial actions taken. Rachel Morgan and Thomas Wilson had been officially terminated. Daniela Ramirez had been promoted to lead training specialist within the newly formed Passenger Experience Division. A comprehensive audit of passenger complaints over the past 3 years had begun with particular focus on potential bias incidents. Initial staff communications about the forthcoming changes had been distributed company-wide. It was a start, but merely preliminary steps in what would be a multi-year transformation process. Alexandria made several notes on areas requiring closer attention or accelerated implementation. A soft knock at her door interrupted her review. "Dr. Wilson James Harrington has arrived for your meeting," her assistant announced. "Show him in, please." Harrington entered looking considerably more composed than during their last encounter, though still carrying the wary expression of a man navigating unfamiliar territory. "Dr. Wilson, thank you for making time to meet," he began, taking the offered seat across from her desk. "Of course," Alexandria replied. "I've been reviewing your preliminary implementation report. There are several areas we should discuss." For the next hour, they worked through the details of the Wilson Accountability Framework implementation timelines, resources, metrics, and expectations. Harrington had clearly come prepared, demonstrating a genuine engagement with the process rather than mere compliance. "There's one matter we haven't addressed yet," Alexandria said as their discussion wound down. "The $12 million penalty payment." Harrington tensed visibly. "The board has approved it. The funds will be transferred by the end of the week." "Good. I want to clarify how those funds will be utilized." "They won't be paid to Skyward Innovations," Alexandria explained. "They'll be directed to establish the Wilson Initiative for Aviation Equity, an independent organization focused on addressing bias in the airline industry through research training and accountability measures." Harrington blinked in surprise. "You're not taking the money for your company." "This was never about financial gain," Alexandria replied. "It's about creating meaningful, sustainable change. The initiative will serve as an industry resource working with airlines, including Meridian, to implement best practices and accountability measures." She handed him a prospectus outlining the initiative's structure, governance, and objectives. "The penalty payment will provide initial funding, but we expect the initiative to become self-sustaining through industry partnerships and consulting services. Meridian Airways will be acknowledged as a founding contributor." Harrington reviewed the document with growing interest. "This is not what I expected." "What did you expect? Frankly, a punitive approach. Most executives in your position would have used this situation to extract maximum concessions or simply to make an example of us." Alexandria regarded him thoughtfully. That approach might satisfy a desire for retribution, but it wouldn't create lasting change. "I'm more interested in transformation than punishment." Harrington nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning in his expression. "The incident report mentioned something you said to Rachel and Thomas, that they were symptoms, not the disease." "Exactly. Firing 2 employees doesn't solve the underlying problems that allowed their behavior to become normalized. That requires structural change, cultural reevaluation, and consistent accountability." As Harrington departed, he paused at the door. Dr. Wilson, I want you to know that despite the circumstances, I believe this partnership will ultimately make Meridian a better company. That's the intention, Alexandria replied simply. Later that afternoon, Alexandria held a video conference with the newly appointed director of the Wilson Initiative, Dr. Elaine Johnston, a respected expert in organizational psychology with extensive experience in corporate diversity initiatives. The framework implementation at Meridian will serve as our proof of concept, Alexandria explained. We'll refine the approach based on that experience before approaching other airlines. Dr. Johnston nodded. I've reviewed the preliminary data from Meridian's complaint audit. The patterns are concerning but not surprising. Similar issues exist across the industry, which is precisely why this initiative is necessary. Alexandria agreed. This isn't just about one airline or one incident. It's about addressing patterns that have persisted for decades. Over the following weeks, the transformation at Meridian Airways began in earnest. Training centers were established at major hubs, beginning with comprehensive sessions for leadership before extending to all customer-facing staff. Independent auditors began reviewing passenger complaint data, identifying patterns that had previously gone unaddressed or unrecognized. Daniela Ramirez emerged as a key figure in the implementation process, her frontline experience and moral courage making her an effective advocate for change within the organization. She worked closely with Dr. Johnston to develop training materials that addressed not just overt bias, but the subtle, often unconscious assumptions that influenced staff behavior. The $12 million penalty payment now directed to the Wilson Initiative funded the development of industry-wide standards and metrics for measuring equitable treatment of passengers. The initiative established partnerships with civil rights organizations, consumer advocacy groups, and aviation industry associations to create a comprehensive approach to addressing bias. 2 months after the incident, Meridian Airways publicly launched its Equal Skies Commitment, a comprehensive program based on the Wilson Accountability Framework that promised measurable improvements in passenger experience, regardless of race, gender, appearance, or background. The announcement received positive coverage in industry publications and mainstream media, with many observers noting that Meridian had transformed what could have been a devastating PR crisis into a leadership opportunity. Behind the scenes, other airlines were taking notice. Several had already approached the Wilson Initiative, discreetly inquiring about implementing similar measures proactively rather than in response to their own incidents. For Alexandria, watching this transformation unfold brought a deep satisfaction that went beyond business success. This was the fulfillment of a promise she had made to herself years ago to create change that would benefit not just herself, but everyone who had ever faced similar treatment. The road ahead would not be smooth or straight. Cultural transformation never was. There would be resistant setbacks and moments when the old patterns reasserted themselves. But the framework now in place provided mechanisms for identifying those moments, addressing them effectively, and continuing the journey toward a more equitable industry. This wasn't just about one black woman being denied her rightful seat in first class. It was about ensuring that no passenger would face such treatment again, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. The transformation had begun. 6 months after the incident at JFK, the changes at Meridian Airways had progressed from corporate statements to visible reality. New training centers operated at all major hubs where staff participated in immersive scenarios designed to challenge unconscious biases and develop more equitable approaches to customer service. An independent auditing team funded through the Wilson Initiative, but operating autonomously, conducted regular reviews of passenger treatment, complaint resolution, and service delivery. Their quarterly reports were published openly, creating unprecedented transparency about issues that had previously been hidden behind corporate walls. Perhaps most significantly, Meridian had implemented an anonymous testing program using diverse volunteers who traveled through their system, documenting their experiences in detail. These reports provided real-world feedback on how effectively the new training and policies were being implemented on the front lines. The results were encouraging. Passenger satisfaction scores had increased across all demographic groups, with particularly notable improvements among passengers of color and those from non-Western countries. Complaint resolution times had decreased by 37%, and the number of escalated service issues had dropped by nearly half. But the ripple effects extended far beyond Meridian Airways. In an industry conference room in Dubai, executives from Global Airways, one of Meridian's chief competitors, were reviewing their own passenger experience metrics with growing concern. Meridian's customer satisfaction scores have increased 12 points in the past quarter, noted their chief customer officer. They're now leading the industry in premium cabin experience ratings. It's that Wilson initiative, the CEO responded. Their Equal Skies program is generating significant positive media coverage and customer goodwill. We need to consider a similar approach. We haven't had a public incident like they did, another executive pointed out. That we know of, the CEO countered. The data suggests otherwise. Let's be proactive rather than waiting for our own viral moment. By the end of that meeting, Global Airways had committed to implementing their own version of the Wilson framework, becoming the first major carrier to adopt the approach voluntarily rather than in response to a crisis. They wouldn't be the last. Within 9 months of the original incident, 7 international airlines had contacted the Wilson Initiative seeking guidance on implementing similar reforms. The approach that had begun as one company's response to discrimination was evolving into a new industry standard. At Skyward Innovations headquarters in Seattle, Alexandria reviewed these developments with quiet satisfaction. She had just concluded a video call with airline executives from 3 continents, all interested in adopting elements of the framework. The industry response has exceeded our projections, noted Gabriella, who had been promoted to Chief of Staff following her handling of the JFK incident. We anticipated 3 to 5 airlines engaging with the initiative in the first year. We're already at 11. Alexandria nodded. When companies see that doing the right thing also improves their bottom line, adoption accelerates. The business case is now as compelling as the moral one. The metrics supported her assessment. Meridian Airways, despite the initial implementation costs, had seen a 9% increase in premium cabin bookings and a measurable improvement in customer loyalty metrics. Their stock price, after an initial decline following the incident, had recovered completely and now traded 4% above pre-incident levels. The board analysis came in this morning. Gabriella added, referring to a comprehensive review of Meridian's governance and leadership. They've implemented 93% of the recommended changes, including tying executive compensation to diversity and inclusion metrics. And Daniela Ramirez Alexandria inquired. Gabriella smiled. Just appointed director of the new Passenger Advocacy Division. She's building a team specifically focused on ensuring equitable treatment across all passenger interactions. This news particularly pleased Alexandria. Daniela had emerged as one of the most effective voices for change within Meridian, her frontline experience and moral courage making her uniquely qualified to guide the transformation. The ripple effects weren't limited to airlines either. Airport authorities had begun reviewing their own procedures for security screening and passenger processing, recognizing similar patterns of potential bias. Ground transportation services, hotels, and other travel-related businesses were examining their practices with new awareness. Alexandria continued her practice of flying anonymously on Skyward-leased aircraft, now with a dual purpose evaluating both the technical performance of the planes and the implementation of the accountability measures. Her experiences were noticeably different than before the framework implementation, not because staff recognized her, but because they didn't need to. The standard of treatment had improved for everyone. She still occasionally encountered moments that indicated the transformation remained incomplete. Old habits and biases didn't disappear overnight, even with the best training and intentions. But now, when such moments occurred, there were clear channels for addressing them, measuring the response, and ensuring appropriate follow-up. The most significant ripple effect, however, was perhaps the least visible. Throughout the industry, conversations that had previously happened in whispers or not at all were now taking place openly. Employees at all levels were discussing bias, examining their own assumptions, and developing new approaches to passenger interaction. It wasn't always comfortable. Change rarely is. But it was necessary, and increasingly it was being embraced rather than resisted. 1 year after the JFK incident, the Wilson Initiative published its first annual report documenting changes across the industry and establishing benchmarks for continued progress. The report received attention not just within aviation, but from other customer service industries seeking similar reforms. For Alexandria Wilson, this expanding impact represented the fulfillment of a vision that had begun years earlier, not with a desire for personal vindication, but with a commitment to creating more equitable systems for everyone. The ripple effect continued to spread, touching more lives with each passing day. On a crisp autumn morning in Atlanta, 22-year-old Jennifer Wilson, no relation to Alexandria, stood outside Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, clutching a letter that had arrived the previous week. The embossed logo of the Wilson Initiative for Aviation Equity gleamed in the morning sunlight as she read the words again, still hardly believing they were real. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the inaugural Wilson Initiative Engineering Scholarship. This full scholarship will cover your tuition and expenses for the master's program in Aerospace Engineering at Georgia Tech, as well as providing a guaranteed internship with Skyward Innovations during the summer semester. Jennifer had grown up in Southwest Atlanta, the daughter of a mechanic and a hospital administrator. From childhood, she had been fascinated by aircraft, spending hours watching planes take off and land from a small hill near the airport perimeter. By high school, that fascination had evolved into a determined interest in aerospace engineering. Despite graduating at the top of her class and earning a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, Jennifer had struggled to find pathways into the aerospace industry. The master's program at Georgia Tech represented her best opportunity, but the cost had seemed prohibitive until the Wilson Initiative announcement. Now, as she entered the airport terminal for her orientation meeting, Jennifer felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The email had instructed her to meet her program advisor at the international terminal at 9 a.m., but had provided few other details. As she approached the meeting point, Jennifer was surprised to see a small group gathered 5 other young people approximately her age, all appearing equally nervous and excited. A professional-looking woman in her 40s approached the group with a warm smile. "Welcome, scholarship recipients. I'm Dr. Elaine Johnston, Director of the Wilson Initiative. We're delighted to have you join our inaugural cohort." After introductions, Dr. Johnston led the group through security and toward a private lounge area. Today is about introducing you to the program and its vision. You've been selected not just for your academic excellence, but for your demonstrated commitment to creating a more equitable aviation industry. Inside the lounge, Jennifer was startled to see Alexandria Wilson herself waiting to greet them. Despite having seen her in news coverage and videos, Jennifer was struck by Alexandria's presence in person, calm, authoritative, but with a warmth that didn't come across in media appearances. "Welcome to the Wilson Initiative Scholars Program." Alexandria began after everyone was seated. "You represent the future of aerospace engineering, not just in technical innovation, but in changing who has access to opportunities in this field." She spoke briefly about the origins of the initiative, explaining how a discriminatory incident had catalyzed a broader movement for change across the industry. "Technical excellence alone isn't enough to create truly transformative innovation," she noted. "We also need diverse perspectives, experiences, and voices at the table where decisions are made." Jennifer listened intently, occasionally glancing at her fellow scholars, a diverse group from various backgrounds, all sharing a passion for aerospace engineering and a desire to contribute to meaningful change. After Alexandria's welcome, Dr. Johnston outlined the program structure: rigorous academic training combined with practical experience, mentorship from industry leaders, and projects specifically focused on innovations that could enhance equity and accessibility in air travel. "You'll be pioneering a new approach to engineering education," Dr. Johnston explained, "one that integrates technical expertise with social awareness and responsibility." Later, as the orientation continued, Jennifer found herself in a small group discussion with Alexandria. Gathering her courage, she asked the question that had been on her mind since receiving the scholarship notification. "Dr. Wilson, what made you create this scholarship program?" The initiative's work with airlines seems directly connected to what happened at JFK. But why focus on engineering education too? Alexandria considered the question thoughtfully. Meaningful change requires multiple approaches. Addressing current practices is necessary but not sufficient. We also need to transform who creates the next generation of aviation technology and policy. She leaned forward slightly. "Throughout my career, I've often been the only black woman in the room during critical engineering discussions. That needs to change, not just for equity's sake, but because diverse perspectives lead to better solutions." Jennifer nodded, thinking of her own experiences as often the only black woman in her engineering classes. "The sky doesn't care what you look like." Alexandria continued, "Only what you contribute. But historically, the pathway to the sky has been obstructed for too many talented people. This scholarship program is about removing those obstructions." Before the orientation concluded, each scholar received a personalized development plan outlining their academic path, internship opportunities, and mentorship connections. Jennifer was paired with a senior engineer at Skyward Innovations who specialized in the composite materials that had first captured her interest years ago. As Jennifer left the airport that afternoon, scholarship details tucked safely in her bag, she felt a profound sense of possibility. This wasn't just financial support for her education, it was an invitation to be part of transforming an industry from the inside out. That evening she called her parents to share the day's experiences. "Mom, I met Dr. Wilson herself," she said excitedly. "She talked about changing who gets to design the future of flight. And that's going to be you," her mother replied, pride evident in her voice. "Not just me," Jennifer corrected. "All of us in the program, and everyone who comes after us, for Alexandria Wilson." Watching these young engineers begin their journey brought a satisfaction distinct from the corporate reforms and policy changes. This was the true long-term impact investing in a new generation of leaders who would continue the transformation long after the initial incident had faded from public memory. The personal impact stories were just beginning to unfold, and they would continue for years to come. 18 months after the incident at JFK Alexandria, Wilson boarded Meridian Airways flight MA-107 to Geneva, the same flight number, same route that had been the site of the original confrontation. This time, however, the boarding process was notably different. The gate area featured digital signage outlining passenger rights and Meridian's commitment to equitable service. Staff interacted with travelers consistently, regardless of appearance or dress, and the boarding process moved smoothly without the hierarchical tension that had previously characterized premium cabin access. Alexandria had maintained her practice of traveling anonymously, though after the viral incident she was occasionally recognized, as happened today, when the lead gate agent gave her a small nod of acknowledgement while scanning her boarding pass. But the recognition came without fanfare or special treatment, exactly as she preferred. As she settled into seat 2A, the same seat she had been questioned about accessing 18 months earlier, Alexandria reflected on the changes that had unfolded since that day. Meridian Airways had transformed from a reluctant participant in reform to an industry leader implementing the Wilson Accountability Framework comprehensively and transparently. The flight attendant greeting first-class passengers was warm and consistent, with everyone regardless of appearance, a small but significant change that reflected deeper cultural shifts within the organization. After completing the pre-flight service, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, Welcome aboard Meridian Airways, Flight MA-107 to Geneva. This is Captain Rodriguez speaking. We're expecting a smooth flight today, with an on-time arrival. First Officer Wilson will be joining me in the flight deck. Alexandria's attention sharpened at the name. It couldn't be. Could it? Moments later, a young black woman in a pilot's uniform appeared from the cockpit. Jennifer Wilson, the scholarship recipient. Alexandria had met during the orientation 18 months ago, made her way down the aisle conducting a final visual inspection as part of the pre-flight routine. When she reached Alexandria's row, Jennifer paused, her professional demeanor giving way to a momentary flash of recognition and delight. "Dr. Wilson," she said softly, so other passengers wouldn't hear. "I didn't realize you would be on this flight." Alexandria smiled warmly. "First Officer Wilson, this is quite a surprise." Jennifer nodded, her expression reflecting both pride and gratitude. "The accelerated program through the initiative, it fast-tracked my pilot certification based on my previous flight experience. I joined Meridian 3 months ago, and already on international routes, Alexandria noted clearly impressed. They needed qualified pilots for the expanded fleet," Jennifer explained. "The new training protocols you implemented actually improved the preparation process." A call from the cockpit interrupted their brief reunion. "I need to complete pre-flight," Jennifer said. But I wanted to say she hesitated, searching for the right words. "You didn't just give me a scholarship. You changed the atmosphere we fly in." "Thank you." With that, she returned to the cockpit, leaving Alexandria momentarily speechless, a rare occurrence for someone normally so composed. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Alexandria gazed out the window at the massive Rolls-Royce engine, a marvel of engineering she knew inside and out. Yet today, it wasn't the technology that captivated her attention, but the human transformation that had unfolded over the past 18 months. Jennifer Wilson, a young woman who 18 months ago had been struggling to find a pathway into the aviation industry, was now in the cockpit of an international flight. Daniela Ramirez, who had risked her job to speak up against discrimination, now led Meridian's passenger advocacy division. The Wilson Initiative had expanded to work with 15 airlines worldwide, creating measurable improvements in equitable treatment across the industry. The incident that had begun with this line is not for coach had catalyzed changes that would impact countless lives for years to come. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky, Alexandria felt a sense of profound satisfaction. This wasn't just about winning a confrontation or teaching a lesson. It was about creating a world where talent, determination, and humanity, not appearance or assumptions, determined who belonged in which spaces. The aircraft banked gently, climbing through the clouds toward cruising altitude. Alexandria watched the earth fall away below boundaries, blurring borders, fading, a reminder that from above, artificial distinctions lost their meaning. There was just the sky, vast and welcoming to all who had earned their place within it. And that, after all, was the point. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Alexandria Wilson gazed out at the endless expanse of sky. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a catalyst for change that extended far beyond one airline or one incident. The Wilson Accountability Framework now operated across 15 major airlines, creating measurable improvements in how passengers were treated regardless of appearance, race, or background. The Wilson Initiative had awarded scholarships to 28 promising students from underrepresented backgrounds, creating pathways into an industry that had too often seemed inaccessible. Perhaps most importantly, conversations about bias and equity that had once happened in whispers now took place openly with transparency and commitment to meaningful action. Alexandria thought of Jennifer Wilson in the cockpit, Daniela Ramirez leading the passenger advocacy division, and countless others whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of that confrontation at JFK. This was the true measure of success, not in corporate policies or public accolades, but in the human impact that would continue long after the original incident faded from public memory. This story reminds us that real power isn't about raising your voice, but about knowing the weight your words carry when you finally choose to speak. It proves that the most effective response to being underestimated is not just to prove them wrong, but to rewrite the rules so they can never be wrong in the same way again. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Have you ever experienced similar treatment or witnessed discrimination in travel? Let us know in the comments below. And for more stories about justice transformation and incredible people who change the world, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring